you guys doing today? Okay, well, I'm going to be giving a speech today about unfair imprisonment system against African Americans. And I want you guys to think, when you are cooking, and if you're going to fry eggs or boil eggs, and you're picking out your eggs and you look at the eggshell, are you biased about which egg you're going to use? If there's like a little scratch or a little mark on one egg, are you going to use a better looking egg? No, they taste the same. The inside is the same. As with human beings, a Caucasian and an African American are all the same inside. They're still human. But yet, African Americans are treated unfairly when it comes down to the imprisonment system. And there's no real answer to it. But I'll try to help you guys understand why it might be happening. My main points today will be the equality of African Americans compared to Caucasians, and it's a battle that they are not winning. And I'll present to you wrongly convicted cases. Okay? On here, it shows that the jurors have a big contribution to why African Americans are treated unequally when it comes to the imprisonment system. They don't have the chance of winning their cases and not being convicted and not being guilty if there's a pool of jurors who are all Caucasian. But why should there be a difference? If you add one African American to the pool of jurors, it totally changes the results. From 81% of African Americans being convicted and 66% of Caucasians being convicted with a full pool of Caucasian jurors, and if you add one African American to it, it almost makes the percentages equal. Does that mean anything, or is it just a coincidence? With one black juror, there are 16% more, or with the pool of all white jurors, there's 16% more often African Americans who are accused of being convicted. And then there's usage and selling drugs at similar rates. So Caucasians and African Americans both have possession of drugs. They both sell at the same rate. But for some reason, African Americans are 10 times more likely in 198 counties in the country, and they're convicted more often for some reason. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. If there's more people in general, I believe that there should be that same amount of percentage of those people being convicted. Prison for the poor, riches for the rich. That's a saying that a lot of people use when it comes to races and going down to poverty. And it shows here that the Caucasians generally have a higher income, whether it's the really high income whites or the middle class income whites. And the highest income African Americans are averaged out to not even make as much as the middle class whites. So I believe that your income really can affect if you're going to be convicted or not, because if you're unable to pay for your expenses such as getting a lawyer or an attorney, you're unable to fight your cases, and it's easier for you to just be claimed and get convicted. Wrongly convicted, but you need to serve the time still. Now, I don't understand why some people are convicted, and if they're convicted, they get set out free, after 10, 20 years, and it's just not fair, because why couldn't they find those results sooner? And there's a saying from David Love. The U.S. criminal justice is a broken machine that wrongfully convicts innocent people. Here. So, James Bain is imprisoned for rape and kidnapping in 1974, and he served the longest time for a DNA dismissal from prison. The victim of the kidnapping assumed that Bain was a rapist due to a similar voice that the uncle of the victim went to school with, so they assumed that it was Bain. And the FBI did a search, and Bain never actually confessed that he was guilty, and he always maintained to his innocence, but they still took him in, and they were like, well, you're guilty. They never gave him a chance to fight his case. And more than 2,000 people are wrongly convicted in the last 24 years, and African Americans at a higher rate, but I never actually found the percentage. It just said that they're at a higher rate of being convicted and being guilty. Okay, Ronald Jones and Dennis Brown, they both are put in a similar case when they were being convicted as guilty. Ronald Jones was sentenced for death, and he was convicted for murder apparently, and the victim explained that he had asked her for cash to buy water, Jones was asked for what he did, and he asked the victim for water, and later on the victim was called on in a report that she was raped and murdered, and later on when the detectives went and searched her, they found semen in her vagina, and they suspected that it was Jones, which it really wasn't, because he was later on released after serving 8 years on death row and 10 years in prison. And it was because of false identity. So it's like, how can you just assume that some semen is a person's and not test it, but later on find out that the identity was not the same because of DNA testings? Did they not DNA test the semen, if that's possible? Dennis Brown, he was also sentenced for life, and he was released after 19 years of serving time. Both of these people actually relate in a similar way because they both were wrongfully convinced to be convicted because they were forced because of physical activity. Cops and FBI's were threatening to shoot and kill him, and for Ronald Jones, he was actually beat almost to death for him to be convicted, for him to claim to be guilty. So, is the imprisonment system fair towards African Americans or not? You decide. I don't think that blacks are being treated fairly just because they're a minority and because they may live in poverty. So, I'm going to let you decide on that. And are you going to be able to choose any egg to eat, or are you going to look at what's inside and go for the taste? Thank you.